Hello, welcome to the Viewpoint. I am Mumudu Mboj. Within the space of a few days, between the 22nd and the 24th of June, we heard the resignations of two high-profile government officials. One of them, the Minister of Justice, now former Minister of Justice and Attorney General, Mr. Abubakar Batambedu, and the other, Mr. Allison Senghor, who was our national coordinator in our COVID-19 fight, in our response team. So, what happened? According to in his Abubakar Tambedu, in his farewell statement, he said that he was doing so for personal reasons. He gave his resignation on the 1st of June, and it will take effect on the 30th. For Allison, perhaps more interestingly, only appointed in May, within a month or so, he was gone. Also cited personal reasons, but he gave an interview where he said some rather staggering, interesting things. Here to help me chew over, to digest some of these happenings, two really discerning, skilled observers of what's going on in this country. I've got Mr. James Bahum, who is the CEO of the Africa Development Group. James, cheers, and a regular, really, on our programs, sharp social and political observer. And I also have, recognizable by everybody really, presenter of QTV's Kachadula, Mr. Sidi Sise, who is also a journalist, who does journalism and also observe things, and a discerning eye on events in this country. Gentlemen, welcome to the Viewpoint.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Maurice.
Absolutely. I mean, James, can I begin with you? What happened with Allison Senghor? I mean, the Secretary General, isn't he, of the Red Cross, been there for a long time. In fact, when he was appointed, everybody thought that was a brilliant decision. Who better than a person who deals with relief to deal with an emergency? Within a month, gone. What do you make of that?
I must first of all start by greeting the audience, and of course, thank you for having us. And I am very pleased to say I am with my younger brother and friend, Mr. Sidi Sise, to help you through some of these very controversial, sometimes baffling in other times, development that are taking place in respect to the resignation of the Attorney General, but also of Mr. Allison Senghor. Now, coming to Allison, this is somebody that I met recently and had a brief conversation, but the wife is my very good friend, and we've worked together. So I know the caliber and professionalism with which he carries out his assignments. He's one of the most successful relief coordinators and a very respected international civil servant at the level of the Red Cross, but also in their relationship with the UN. So this is somebody who is used to a certain culture of work. And to find himself in a situation where this was a cry for help, in fact, where he lamented the lack of action on the part of government to support his assignment, which was most recently. Tells me he was crying out for help as well. But it is in the nature of his understanding of how these things should work, given his experience, that he decided perhaps looking at the current situation, a situation where he couldn't even have the necessary data to start his work, let alone meet the minister or any of the other senior officials of the Department of Health to help coordinate, because that is the job that he was given. So to find himself in that kind of situation for any professional of his standing makes it difficult for him to continue working because he has no tools, no equipment to work with. So I think there is justifiable, reasons for him in that situation not to tarnish what is a very sterling reputation gained and built over many years of hard work. So I'm not surprised, but there must be, that in itself tells us that things are not what they're supposed to be in government.
Absolutely. Let me just bring in Sidi here.
So for somebody like that not to be appreciated, I think that is a telling indictment.
staggering. I mean, I've got this quote here. I mean, I can't do my job as expected, all attributed to Allison Senghor. And another one is just that I come from a culture of work, and which is different from the culture that is in government. I mean, I was taken aback, and I thought, so you mean the culture of government is not the culture of work? What do you make of that?
Thank you so much, Mr. Boch, and thank you, my brother James. Is a good brother of mine. We have a long history of things like this. I mean, so it's great to have him here. Thank you very much, Mr. Boch, once again. On the issue of Allison, I mean, when he was appointed was a very crucial time. It was a time when the government needed a facelift. Not only a facelift, but confident building in terms of the COVID-19 approach. How do we deal with this crisis that we find ourselves? Understanding fully that Gambia have never experienced anything like this. We have never been in a crisis to fight an epidemic. So when Allison was contacted, some of us were aware. Like James have said, I'm very close to the family. So things like this, of course they will consult us. In fact, what is very surprising is that it was even announced that he was appointed even when he did not receive his letter. But some of us said, engage them and make sure the TOR are all in fine tune and all that, and which, definitely he did, engage them, make sure the TOR and everything was in fine tuning, and that's what he wanted, things to be done properly, and actually that's what he wanted. Like James have said earlier, when he took up the position as the national coordinator, let's understand the word the national coordinator. Absolutely, he should work with all stakeholders, all institutions as far as the fight against COVID-19 is concerned. But unfortunately, that did not happen. This is a guy who did everything to help, like James have said, in the Red Cross, in the UN, has a history of work in East Africa, West Africa, and all that. You would have thought when Gambia government asks for his service and is willing to give his service, step away from his role as the Secretary General of the Red Cross, definitely he wanted to do the job. But the tools weren't there. For example, when he asks for information, data is not there. And I think what breaks the camel's back, just to be quick here, is the last ministerial select committee that they had. When the subject of SM Brussels came up, he made it very clear that we aren't ready to have SM Brussels here at the time. The airport is not ready. The staffs at the airport aren't trained. Why are taxpayers going to foot the bill of quarantining 140 passengers on SM Brussels? And some are saying, oh, but these are Gambians, they need to come. We then understand not all of them are Gambians. They may be Gambian residents, but not all of them. But if Gambians were to come back, it should be the duty of the government to organize a special flight for these people to come. But taxpayers should not shoulder the responsibility of paying the bills for these people to be quarantined. And two, our airports weren't ready. We've seen the disaster that happened. 4 of the passengers on that flight escaped. And what did they do? The minister came out with a press release. All right, these people have, disappeared. They must report themselves, or we're going to publish their names and all that. Why do we have to do that in the first place when we could have stopped this flight? And guess what? 2 of the passengers now are positive of COVID-19.
Absolutely. There were the 2 last confirmed.
Yeah, confirmed. 2 are already confirmed, and some are still on quarantine. Absolutely. So these are all factors that Allison, being the type of person he is, and hang on a minute, I cannot be part of something like this. I cannot tell you X and you do Y. And then it's my reputation. And this guy has been in international for 28 years, approximately. I remember when he was at Red Cross, I was going to school. So he has done so much to build a reputation. And I think it's so unfortunate. At the time when government should be building confidence and facelift, Allison had to step aside. It is bad.
Absolutely. And here, James, of course, we're going to have to come to the question, who overruled him? It's quite interesting. When we look around the world, really, you have national coordinators or chief medical officer. These technical people are really taking many of the decisions. Politicians are really taking a back step, as it were. So these people are leading. But it seems here that there are others overruling the national coordinator. I even wonders what the Minister of Health, what he thought about this.
The first thing is that it is a shame that somebody who is given an assignment to coordinate all of these responses could not meet the minister on the first day. For me, that is a big problem. Because here there was urgency, there was need for rapid response to some of the emerging developments. And if he cannot find that, if he cannot have that on the first day of his appointment, that also is a failure on the part of government to accommodate him. Of course, we have seen departmental officials making decisions about certain important elements of the response program. But at the same time, people with knowledge who had come into the fray to support the process are not even able to get access to these people. So on the question of whether there is anybody overruling him, I think he had had enough of it, as far as I'm concerned. Whether he was overruled or not, the man had come out and stated clearly that there are failures in the system which does not enable him to do his work. He didn't just resign, okay, on a personal basis, of course, but there are reasons behind, they will always use that language. And he has made it clear. So for me, when politicians are given responsibilities to oversee experts, there's always a problem. And in Mr. Senghor's, own position, I think his resignation, like I was saying, is an indictment of the system, because it shows that there are serious failures at a time when we needed to be more astute in our response to this. We need to engage all sectors that have a direct bearing or otherwise to the fight against COVID-19. Now, here is an expert of international repute who came to support the process, and he couldn't find any. Whether he was overruled specifically on the SN Brussels issue, I think that is only a symptom of what we are trying to understand. That politicians maybe, or the minister himself, have a lot of sway in this matter. But whether it is the right kind of reaction and the right kind of decisions that they are making, on the basis of this resignation, I don't think they are.
Okay, but here the question surely is important, because really we need to pinpoint really all these this tension, where the tension is coming from and stuff, so that we will know. We need to dig up what's going on. For instance, do you think this gives us a kind of indication of the decision-making process in government, and who overruled him? I think we need to know.
Mr. Boyd, when it comes to COVID-19, the coronavirus, it's not like diabetics, it's not like hypertension. This is an infectious disease that is being transmitted, person to person and stuff like that. So the reproduction, you must have a program. You see, that's where Allison would have been looking at, for example. I mean, we know the capacity of tests in this country is very limited. The national laboratory that they said is in function, I understand, cannot do 50 a day, far less. I mean, we rely on MRC. So we are not being guided about the number of people we are testing and how this disease is in the increase or in the decrease. So that is a factor that is missing. And again, when you want to, when you declare a state of public emergencies, you have to be measured about the reproduction of this disease. How is it in the increase? Is it in the low? What is happening? Is it happening more in the KM, or is it in the rural area? These are all factors. How do you ease down the lockdown, or how do you ease down the state of public emergency? So we don't have a specific program from the Ministry of Health, or the newly appointed national coordinator, who is Allison Senghor, because he's not being they've not availed him with the information. So that was a dilemma as well. But we see when the drivers came on board and say, okay, we need to carry this maximum amount of passengers and stuff, the government went in and sit down, and all of a sudden we say, oh, they are carrying 75%. So they are not being guided by any figures. So that is totally bad. And when you come to the issue of SM process, we know that the Vice President is the chairperson of the Ministerial Select Committee of COVID-19. And we are aware there are ministers who absent themselves from those meetings numerous occasions, who are very important ministers. You are talking about transport, for example. If, for example, the Minister of Transport, choose not to be attending that meeting for numerous occasions. I mean, this is an institution that has to be part of the process of deciding the fate of these drivers and the Gambian people. I'm just giving an example. So this is what, when James talked about what Allison said, the culture, and you talked about the culture, that's what we need to look at. It's serious that we are in a crisis and we don't have our hands on deck and to put things together to see that Gambians are protected. Because we know we have a very fragile health sector. So what we can do is to protect ourselves. We cannot afford to get hundreds of thousands of people with COVID-19 in this country. That would be a disaster.
I mean, if this is an epitome of what generally happens, then we are in trouble.
Yes, Mr. Boj, we have been in trouble for a little while, look. And I am sure, you know, this one is only one of a series, starting from when this government came to office. Of course, one can argue all you want about the fact that we inherited a bad system. That is very true as well. But also, it seemed that we are not learning as we progress through these difficult times. And it is true that this whole argument that we have achieved change or that the system is changed, these are contradictions in themselves. We know that they are working under very difficult circumstances. But sometimes some of the failures are pretty basic. And you would wonder why it is that we cannot get it right at that stage, at that level. But my belief is that Allison and his resignation is a pointer to our continuing failure in so many respects to address some of the challenges that we face.
Absolutely. I mean, you call it our the inheritance, yeah. the institutional inheritance. Perhaps that wasn't only our inheritance. What about the leadership? Isn't that really also part of the inheritance? One can say that. There appears to be sort of, we've not been talking about it, journalists really, when we're discussing this. There is no sure-footedness at the heart of government. So we sort of knew that we had to give them time to find their feet, isn't it? None of them really had any experience in running a government. Let's be honest with it. Very, very few at the highest level.
I think
three and a half years.
We have taken our foot off the accelerator. I think we are not going in the right direction. The reasons being, this was a pact of a transitional program. Like James have rightly said, we inherited a system that is very bad. And, you know, we all accept that. The Barrow and everybody say, you know, 22 years of AIJ, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But it seems down the road, you know, we are away from that. We are more focused of consolidating power. I think that's what the regime is doing. Barrow is doing everything he can to get himself beyond 2021. So it's not about the reform agenda. It's not about the transitional justice system. It's not about the civil service reform, the security reform, all the reform package that we thought, you know, worth us going into the street. Our parents, young and old, getting their voters card to get out there and vote massively to support the coalition, to get Jammeh out and bring that change. Vanish in thin air, which is sad. It's really sad. But it's not too late. I mean, they can do something different if they are interested.
I think leadership, if I just come to the leadership question, it's part of the whole failure, structural failure. Of course, you will have we have an executive government in place where the president wields a lot of power. He delegates his responsibilities to ministers and other officials around the civil service and, you know, the whole service sector. And I am of the view that if things are going right, I think it was, I read this a long time ago about Shaka Stevens, where it says, if a fish is going bad, it starts from the head. Now, we understand that it was a difficult situation that they inherited. And it was therefore necessary to have a visionary leader, somebody who people can inspire people to change, but somebody as well who is not wedded to the idea of continuing in office for a prolonged period of time. The whole idea of the coalition was to last for a transitional period of 3 years, to lay the foundations for a new emerging democracy and a new political dispensation. That happened, the casting aside of that key fundamental aspiration happened a long time ago. Now, whether that has a direct impact on how the government operates today, whether, of course, we know priorities have changed, and that now is about perpetuity rather than, reform and so forth and so on. But of course, if anything in the government goes well, the president takes the credit. If it goes wrong, and we are seeing a lot of, failures on the way, he must also take responsibility for it, because they are all working in his name. Now, what we have is a system that is pretty much intact from what we had under the dictatorship that we defeated. So symbolically, we only have a new leadership. And that leadership now was entrusted with a historic, responsibility to transform our country, a country that for the first time has experienced a handover of power using through electoral means. And that whole idea was not born out of a desire for continuing in office. It was an agreement that said specifically, help us change this process so we can build and birth a new democracy. So for me, the failure started there, where important people who are naturally change makers were marginalized and set aside with all their expertise. Gambia does not need any more expert to come from anywhere. Gambians have the capacity to make a success of this transition, of the reform agenda that was originally agreed. So this change of priority, I'll put it like that, is itself the core reason why we are in where we are today. And I'm ashamed to say that what we started off and what started off as a good process for change has now fallen by the wayside.
Yes, that's what power and
These
politics,
are
that's what they do.
symptoms of that failure.
Absolutely. So we will see whether he would be replaced at all or who's going to replace him. Of course, now we have to go to Batambedu.
Yes.
How was it when you first heard? Your immediate reaction?
I think with Ba, the card was out of the bag before the state came out. I think
That's
quite a
what
few
happens.
people knew what was going behind the scenes. Rather unfortunate, because I remember when Ba took up this job, it was sort of like, he's the right person at the right time, because it's reform. He's a guy who is out there and had a lot of experience and knowledge how to do certain things in terms of after a dictatorship, because it was all over. And he did few statements mentioned that when he was contacted to take this job, he had to talk to his family and friends, and then they told him, when the country needs you, you have to. And this time around, he left. Government did not say where he's going. They wish him well, very nicely. Batu said on personal reasons, but we understand. I don't know how true it is that he's going to another job. So he left country for a job outside. So for me, I don't believe and I don't think it's because of the job. That's why he's going. I think he's frustrated. He's actually frustrated. That's what I believe.
The symptoms, same symptoms here, Allison, we were just discussing Allison, so he also had to deal with.
He has to deal with. And then being the Attorney General and the Minister of Justice in this cabinet is possibly the hottest seat. And we have seen certain things that definitely didn't go down well with the people, whether in support of Adama Barrow or against Adama Barrow, the opposition, the APRC and stuff. A lot of noise, personal attacks and all that. Ba is very good in what he does, but there is something that he's not good at. And I guess he'll watch this program. And, he doesn't build a thick skin. He did not build a thick skin. I think he reacted because we have seen when the diplomatic passport issue came up and how he dealt with it. So it seems he doesn't have a thick skin. And of course, with a job like that, at a time when a dictatorship is off, that's one of the things that he needs to develop, a thick skin. So for me, I'll let my brother come in there. I don't think he left for a job. I think he's frustrated, actually, with what is going on.
Absolutely. So he needed to have a thick skin. Here, of course, often we refer to that position as a political, but it's not quite true, is it? Because you're serving there two functions. As Attorney General, you know, where we need your independent advice, but you're a minister. You sit in cabinet, so the political is part of it. So quite interesting. So no wonder it was really a very hot seat.
It's always going to be a hot seat as chief advisor to the president and to the government, but also someone who prosecutes as well in the name of government. There is precedent for this. In the United Kingdom, prior to the Blair years, when the whole legal structure was changed with the creation of the Supreme Court, taking away the judicial functions of the House of Lords to a new Supreme Court. Yeah. That was revolutionary. It is also true that many submissions to the CRC had recommended a separation of the office of the Attorney General and the Minister of Justice.
Isn't that actually what's happening in Britain? They've got an Attorney General, but they've got a Minister of Justice or a similar role.
That was all part of the Blair
Absolutely,
reforms,
the Blair Revolution, yes.
And so we had an opportunity to do that, to put a direct delineation of the two responsibilities and functions, because potentially it's a clash. And we know that the Attorney General is a senior counsel as well, and appears in court in the name of the government. So there is this conflict that I suspect we have missed an opportunity to rectify that, because the draft does not change the current situation. And I think that puts the Attorney General in any government under this strict spotlight, because he's responsible for both advising government but also proposing laws in the name of the government. And so some of the decisions that he will take will be politically motivated, and also because the government has an agenda as well. So there are certain things that, his independence at that level is not unrestrained, as it were. And I think that puts him in a very hot seat, like you rightly pointed out. But coming to Ba and his resignation, the argument has been raging about whether he was a good Attorney General or not. My own personal opinion, which may not agree with most, is that given where we are coming from, like we talked about these things, it was always a difficult thing. We've never really experienced transitional justice system of the kind that we are now looking at. We have never not really encountered or experienced that social upheaval that resulted in the need to really reform and look again at these things. So this is all, new to us. And in as much as my opinion says Ba was in fact, a very good Attorney General, because he has done exactly what we asked him, perhaps with a little missteps here and there, perhaps with pitfalls that were not seen, or maybe a kind of adamant need to do things in a certain way which perhaps may not go down well with the public. But I think one of his greatest achievements is that through the transitional justice process, he has managed to support the process of social cohesion. That there was no strict disruption with the APRC folks, for instance, and those who appeared before the TRRC, and the difficult challenge that he faced in making some of the hardest decisions with regards to some of those who confessed to murder, but also to try and limit, the effect of the residual problems that we suffered on the Jammeh. So I think in that regard, he has succeeded. He's put the TRRC together, for instance. The CRC has already, submitted their report. So the Jammeh Commission, the National Human Rights Commission, for instance, and the Faraba incident and all these that we investigated, perhaps in a way that we would not have under the last dispensation. So all of this, for me, points to somebody who had the intention really to change and make change happen, and has put in place the pillars that will continue. Whether he was supposed to stay until the end of the process, it's not government does not depend on one person being present for it to be successful. The person who has come in, Mr. Jallo, has to pick up from where Mr. Tambedu left off and continue the agenda for change and transition. And I think that, most people have been very uncharitable to him, considering the difficulties that he faced, whether it be in terms of resources, whether it be in terms of personnel. So with a very skeletal kind of AGC, he was still able to make tangible progress that we are now witnessing as it go ahead. Nobody is perfect, of course, and he may have made certain missteps. He may have made certain encounter some pitfalls, but so is anybody else you would have brought, because this situation we are facing is unprecedented, and we would have had to innovate, make, think outside the box, and use our ingenuity, to transition with limited resources and all the rest that was there. So I think, in my view, in my own personal opinion, I think he's been a very good AG. And of course, we will have to wait and see how it all falls through. But he's also picked up a new job, a job that I think he is well fitted for, because he worked in the transitional justice systems in other countries, and this is directly linked to it.
Absolutely. Would you endorse that?
Absolutely. From where you have very good AG, definitely. Like I said earlier on, he was the right person at the right time. Of course, we were aware there were instances where certain decisions were taken at government level that did not involve him, and those were hard to take if he was the Attorney General. A decision, let's say, for example, the arrest of the 9 NIA nine NIA officers. Yes. And we've seen he came out and he wasn't prosecuting them. We had an independent prosecutor who is Antuman Gay, I think. But nothing happened with that case. It's still dragging. So those are things that probably, if they have consulted him, it would have been a different thing. The TRRC, perfect. The Constitutional Review Commission, perfect. The Human Rights Commission, great. The Jammeh Commission, great. And one thing that we must also commend BAFO is the independence of the judiciary. We have seen some landmark rulings against the government. We would have never had that in the last 22 years. So I'm not saying he did it, but in his leadership, he has shown to the world, to the Gambian people, that my institution will not interfere in the rulings in court, and we've seen it. We have seen the Yakumba Jete case, the Court of Appeal ruling a few weeks ago. So actually, I would say, he did a very good job. He did a very good job. It's sad that he left. We probably, would do a lot with him, but unfortunately, people have to move on. Like James have said, government do not, depend on one person. We have Dawda Ba there, so let's hope.
Dawda Jallo.
Dawda Jallo, sorry. Yes. Let's hope the job is done. But this is very crucial. because we have a lot of work that needs to be done. We have the referendum coming up. We have the draft constitution coming up. You got the NIA 9, still in remind. A lot of other stuff. The TRRC, we're wrapping up now. All these things are going to happen. I mean, the electoral reform, all is there. The judicial reform, the law reform. That one thing I would, ask why BA did not start that is the law reform, for example. I thought, putting a lot of effort in the TRRC, the Constitutional Review Commission, the Human Rights Commission, that should have been, at least something happening in that section, because the last time we had a law reform in this country was in 1994. So the 22 years of AIJAM, we didn't have any law reform. So one would have thought in these 3 years, we would have been looking at the laws of this country, because they are very bad laws. And these are all not going to be captured in the Constitution. We have to be mindful. All the time they keep saying, yes, we are drafting a new Constitution, great, but our laws also needs to be looked at. So, I mean, his legacy for me, he did a wonderful job. Of course, it's not perfect, but again, like Mr. Bahum said, my brother, it is a ministry that is, you call it a political, so it's quite difficult, because there are certain things that he needs to do. I mean, you have to watch out, whether this will make government to lose support, and stuff like that. So it's quite difficult. So that's why I thought, in fact, when I had the program with the chair of the CRC, there was something I put to him, that is it not the time that we separate the Attorney General and Minister of Justice? I think we need that. I mean, of course, the thing is going to be before the National Assembly. Hopefully, they would see in that light that we need that institution independent, so that the government can have their special legal advisor, and we can have the judicial that is independent from the government. Because if we have that, the Court of Appeal ruling, actually, BA will not solder it. I mean, the Yakuma Kijeti case, BA will not solder it. So these are things that we need to look at. We are thinking from now on we will move to perfect situations than going backward.
Absolutely, and of course internationally, I mean, it was a delightful, fantastic contrast, because previously we were known for human rights violations. Then what do we have here? Little Gambia taking Myanmar to court for genocide. We are defending human rights. I mean, the whole world must be like, what are these Gambians like? Fantastic.
I think that is a return to our core values.
Absolutely.
And something that Gambia has been known for before, which was the defender of human rights. And no doubt that's one of the motivations for the building of the
Human Rights Center.
Human Rights Commission here in the Gambia. Yes, that was in terms of repairing Gambia's international reputation, which had been battered for 22 years. It was important to have a policy of interaction with international organizations. You remember when they just took over, it was a re-establishment of membership of the Commonwealth, for instance, and we also rescinded the withdrawal from the ICC, and also to also rededicate ourselves to some of the international protocols on human rights and social justice that we signed up to. So I think the Myanmar case falls within that context, where Gambia was supported by the major international organizations to pursue this cause. It is because they have a recognition or a remembrance of where Gambia used to be before the interregnum of 94 to 2016 that they called upon them. But then look at the international justice system. It's replete with Gambians of high reputation. And this is something we must celebrate. I worked in a law firm in London for a little bit, and one of my, my colleagues used to ask me, small Gambia, he's a Nigerian guy, Chidi, small Gambia, how come you get all these big jobs in the international? And I said to him, he thought our educational system should have been, or is the best in the world if we can produce so great luminaries. Yeah, but in terms of restoring our battered image, I think BA had done extremely well. And the Rohingya case only enhances our profile. Some people have asked why is it we go after Myanmar when we have our own local problems. of course, you can chew gum and walk at the same time.
Absolutely.
We don't have to settle for one track, you know. We can do a lot of things, and that's what government does. Several moving parts, but it's all somehow coordinated for the production of, you know, things that benefits the community, because that's what the role of government is. So I think Mr. Barr's intervention in that hot, you know, problem, and the way that he handled it also enhances our reputation that we've had and shared for a long time. So I think it was a good stroke.
Absolutely. But now we're coming towards the end, really. There were controversies. There's much we have to accept. The release of the junglers. And even some would say that also in the beginning, when the age limit had to be changed for Fatimata Tambajang to become VP, and others. Well, what do you make of these controversies, these apparent blotches on his CV?
Yeah, just to conclude from where James stopped, by going to the international. Yeah, we know Gambia. Sadauda was known for, and Gambia was known for doing the great things. Even when we were young, the Senegal and Guinea problem, Senghor and Sekou Touré, you know, where there was a trouble. Sadauda was there, Iraq and Iran, the Liberia problems, you name them, you know. So Gambia, Gambia definitely has always been the peacemaker, not only in the sub-region, but in the world. So definitely, you know, it's a continuation for what Ba did. The release of the junglers, I mean, tactically, let's look from there, where Ba comes from, that we need something. You know, if you want to take Gambia to court today, we need evidence. We need people who can stand and say, X, Y, Z, I did it because of X, Y, Z. So from that angle, this, we'll call them, it was a bit of a calculation on his side that I need these people so that I can get more information. You know, they are bargain chips. And I think that's what probably he thought of and did it. On the issue of Fatoumata Jallow Tambajang's age amendment, I don't think Ba Tambadou took that to the assembly. I think it was my Fatim. So that's why I said, when they were arresting the 9 NIAs and that of Fatoumata Jallow Tambajang, the amendment and stuff, all that were done without not consulting Ba. So there was certain decisions were made, and Ba was not in the picture. And those were times, and I had, he had addressed these issues, and they said, okay, they will learn from it, but I didn't think the government learned from it. So unfortunately...
Wonderful defense there. We will come to the end.
I'm not defending Ba. I'm just saying.
No, but wonderful points. You've argued your points cogently.
What we had, just to conclude there, we had people who had vested interest in certain things. That's why we see certain changes that happen and other changes didn't happen in the 1997 Constitution.
Absolutely. And James, you've made your point, your point clear. When it comes to your ledger, far more on the positive side than negative.
Yes, because I that's it. Kind of like assess the whole situation and looking at, you know, our legacy, where we're coming from, what we are trying to achieve, and the conflicts therein. We have a current system that we fought against. The whole structure is still in place. They're having to work within that structure, so it's always going to be difficult. About the release of the, you know, the junglers and others,
maybe 30 seconds.
Yes. I think that is still open to debate, but it had come with a lot of sentiments, and people were not happy. Of course, it was always going to be difficult. I believe that you know, in total, there were, like we talked about, you know, pitfalls and challenges and barriers and stuff, and this perhaps some of these issues are part of that, those challenges that we face, which were insurmountable, but also the pitfalls.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I'm James Bahom and Sidi Cisse. And thank you for our viewers, and of course to Ba. Good luck in your new job. Until the next time, I'm Mahmoud Boj on The Viewpoint. Bye-bye.